recording. So today is, what's the date? July 14th, 2024. We are in Ames, Iowa at 2901 Oakland Street. And Kitty, the granddaughter, is going to be asking Kathleen, Grandma Kathleen, some questions, and this is Catherine on the video. So Kitty.
Do you have a question for me, Kitty?
Yes. When you were a kid, how much was like the price of a gallon of milk? Or like
That is really hard. I'm sure, first of all, I don't know that we ever got milk in anything bigger than quart bottles.
Uh-huh.
And they were glass bottles. And when I was a young child living, with my parents at home, the milk was delivered by a milkman. So we had there was a box on the front, eventually a box on the front steps, but at one point the milkman had a carrier that he could put, 4 quarts or 6 quarts or whatever, and he would bring them to the house, and he must have come on regular days. I don't know if it was, over the years that probably changed, maybe twice a week or 3 times a week, and you could get milk, regular milk, or cream. That was a real treat. Every now and then you'd get a half pint of cream to make whipped cream for special desserts or something. And I hesitate about the price because I think it was because it was only the milkman brought only milk that my parents paid him directly, and I don't know if they maybe paid him by the week or the month or something like that. So I don't remember. I have a feeling in the store that milk was maybe something like 25 cents a quart. I'm just not sure. When I was really young, this is a longer answer than
That's okay.
That's
what we want.
Really young, when I lived when my father was in the Navy, from when I was 3 to 6, I lived most of that time in the house of my grandmother or my Uncle Eddie, who had a dairy farm. And the dairy farm, they had cows that they milked, and then they processed the milk and bottled it, and they had a truck that they would go around and deliver the milk to places. So those of us who lived there had unlimited milk. It was always, if you needed milk, there was milk there. So you picked a question that was not simple. But I still do. I still like to drink milk, and we always had milk.
Yeah.
But I kind of remember when, like when my kids were little, buying milk when it went over $1 a gallon, that was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, now it's at least like $4, $3, $4, $5 a gallon, depending what you get. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Good question, Kitty.
and what's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory? Well, I remember some of that time when we were living with my grandmother and my Aunt Rita, who was in her early 20s and actually going to college for part of the time, and my Uncle John, who was younger. He was 18 when we first moved in with them, and Grandma and Aunt Rita and Uncle John all thought it was fun to teach me things You know, I was like 3, and then 4, and then 5. And so they taught me how to tell time and how to spell and how to do all kinds of things, because they, you know, it was like 3 adults with 1 child to focus on.
Mm-hmm. No
In
wonder.
addition to
You're
my
so
mother,
smart.
who was
Yeah.
and my sister Virginia was a baby. She was only like 8 months when this all began. So they really, and I can remember being in that the farmhouse where they lived and having them, you know, like point to a clock and talk about the big hand and the little hand and all that. I might have been closer to 5 when that happened.
Was this the farm in Tewksbury?
Yes, on
Okay.
Pike Street in Wamasett.
In
There were 2. The bigger farm that had the
Massachusetts.
dairy was on one side of the street, and the older one, which was the house that my grandfather built for his parents, and my grandmother came there when she married him, and all of my aunts and uncles and mother
Wait,
were.
your grandfather
My grandfather Sullivan, my
built
mother's father, built that house for his parents.
For his parents.
Yeah.
I didn't know for sure if they came over from Ireland. Or...
Yes, because he was young when they came over.
Okay.
And they lived there with them, and so my great grandmother lived there, I think, until she died, and then my grandmother, you know, raised her family there.
Yep.
Until my grandfather died before I lived there. He was not alive. It was just he died in 1934.
And you were born in.
I was born in 39, and it
39.
was 1942 when my father joined the Navy.
And you went to live there.
One thing I remember from when I was probably still 3, a few months after my father joined the Navy, but it may have been a year. The ship that he was going to go on, which he eventually went to the South Pacific on, was called the Briareus, and it was commissioned at the Brooklyn Navy shipyard.
Mm-hmm.
And so he hadn't been able to come home very much, and my mother was invited to that commissioning, and it turned out there was a Maloney cousin of some kind. You know, my grandmother's maiden name was Maloney. There was a Maloney cousin of some kind who lived in Brooklyn.
Huh.
So my mother took me on the train. We went from Boston to New York, and stayed with, I suppose it was just a couple of days, this Maloney people in Brooklyn, and went to the commissioning of the ship.
Neat.
And had a tour of the ship.
Wow.
And it was a transport ship. It was taking supplies to.
And so you would have only been like 4 or 5, right?
That's right. I think that's what it's right around it, right for. And the thing I really, they gave me a tour of the ship, and one of the things we went through, I remember, was a galley where they, you know, had to prepare meals for all these hundreds of sailors. It was a big, big ship, and we went through a galley, and there was a cook or somebody there, and he was standing beside a great huge, you know, to my mind it's huge, vat of onions. And I said to him, my daddy doesn't like onions. He doesn't want to eat onions. You shouldn't cook onions. My daddy doesn't like onions, because my dad did not like onions. So I knew that at that end. Anyway, I remember being on the train. I remember going to the ship. I remember that the Maloney's had a breakfast nook with a bench and a little table.
Yeah.
And I think it was a small house. Yeah. So those are some of
your
my
first memories.
I've seen pictures of when I was younger, before my dad went in the Navy, when I would only have been maybe 2.5, walking on the sidewalk outside our house in Billerica, but that's all fuzzy.
Yeah. So did you not remember your dad much at that time?
Well, we saw him on the ship in his sailor suit.
Okay.
Yeah. But from before that, I don't remember much. I mean, then afterwards, it's hard to tell what's what.
The time sort of blends, right? Good
He
one.
always wore a fedora hat. That was common, that all men wore hats outside all the time at that time. And I know he did after the war. I think he probably did before the war too, but I don't know what I'm remembering.
Mm-hmm. Got another one, Kitty?
Who were you named after?
Who was I named after? Well, it's appropriate that I'm speaking with 2 people in the room who are part of the chain that I was named for, which are the Catherines. So my mother was Catherine. My grandmother, her mother, was Catherine. My great-grandmother, her mother was Catherine.
Wait, your great?
So there were 3 Catherines. My mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother were all Catherines. So I was Kathleen, just to be a little bit different.
Right.
So then when I had a girl, to kind of keep the tradition going, but changed it a little bit, we named her Catherine with a K, and I think it's still hard to tell if those early Catherines were C or K. Most of them were C, but
yeah,
I think
it's funny.
My grandmother may have been K.
I saw them on census records and things. I think both ways, you know, and probably they may have been reported by other people or whatever. But
and so there were 3. I'm the 4th. You're the 5th, and Katerina is the 6th.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know the one before that. If
I think it was Margaret. I think Catherine Maloney's mother was Margaret.
I sort of think that too.
Yeah.
That was it. But my father's mother was also Catherine.
Right.
She was Catherine with a K. Quite sure.
Your father's, Catherine. What was her maiden name
Kelly.
before? Catherine Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Desmond. Yeah.
So there were actually 7 Catherines.
Yeah.
Are you running out of
one more
space?
Or you want to take a break? Or are we good for one more maybe? Find a interesting one.
What was a proud achievement?
What?
What was a proud achievement during your childhood or teenage years?
Oh.
During my childhood and
teenage years? Teenage years?
Oh, teenage years. Well, I was a good student. And so when I was in 8th grade, I went to a private school. When I was 8th grade, I took a citywide scholarship test to go to a girls' academy, and I believe I got the highest grade on that test. Mm-hmm. And so I got a scholarship to this sort of fancy girls' academy, which was Notre Dame Academy in Tingsboro, Mass. It's still operating. It was partly a boarding school. And it was operated by the Sisters of Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And they were known as good educators. Anyway, I think I got my picture in the paper for that. Mm-hmm. And it was, something kind of special. Yeah. And then actually it turned out to be good because from there I got a half scholarship to college, and Emmanuel College was operated in Boston. Yeah. Operated by the same order of nuns, so they had some scholarship things that went there. Mm-hmm. But
and how old you were? How old were you?
I was 12 when I took that first test. So I was 12 when I started 9th grade, actually. And so I graduated from high school when I was 16.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow. So up until that time,
that was June and
you
September.
Were just in the like elementary schools in Tewksbury or Billerica? Or? Lowell. Yeah. Okay.
When I was supposed to start kindergarten while my father was in the Navy, and we were living in Tewksbury. So the Tewksbury school was not very close, and it was pretty small, and so my mother thought the parochial school in Lowell would be a better thing. I'm not sure exactly how they chose. Mm-hmm. St. Peter's, which was the one I went to, which was in a big church parish. Mm-hmm. In a relatively poor neighborhood, a lot of, at the time, immigrants and different ethnic groups. Mm-hmm. And so I went to kindergarten at St. Peter's School, but on the first day, thanks to Aunt Rita and Uncle John and Grandma, mm-hmm. I could tell time,
and
could count, I could read. I think I was the only one in the class who could tell time. They had an old-fashioned clock. And so they moved me into first grade. Yeah. They just physically put me in first grade. So that was the fall when I was still 4. This was early September, and I was going to be 5 in September, 19th. So I started school before I was 5, but that would ended up being first grade, so I was always a year
A
ahead.
year ahead. Wow, well, I think that was a great start at an interview. Hi, Kitty. I'm just going to get a good picture of you. Is that a good place to stop for now?
Yes.
All right.
Go get a drink of water.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you.